Dr. John Koumoulides, Ball State history professor, has spent his summers researching and documenting church art in northern Greece. He's the co-author of Churches of Aegir in Larissa. And this is a very beautiful coffee table type book that has been published. And Dr. Koumoulides, you told me it's been going quite well, especially during the Christmas season.
Well, it has considerable appeal to individuals with interest in art, especially the post-Byzantine period, 1453 to 1821, and an appeal to people interested in ecclesiastical architecture. And because of its many illustrations, about 62 color illustrations.
Let's show some of those illustrations. They're just breathtaking. These are the frescoes that are in.
They're the frescoes of the 12 churches described in the book, and it has 43 architectural drawings. The churches, each church has been described, given its history, and representative examples of its art, its frescoes, as well as architectural drawings of the structure.
Why did you become interested in the churches, and why?
Well, it was in 1965. I was visiting the area as a student from Cambridge, England, and visited this monastery, 15th century monastery. It was used as a stable, and in my naivete then as a student, but also my romantic love for the monastery, I thought it might be a good thing to do something and restore it.
Does this monastery have frescoes?
This monastery has frescoes, and in 1969, a year after I arrived at Ball State University, I was honored by being given the permit to restore the monastery, and I did restore the monastery, and a book was published about it. And then, furthermore, to proceed to catalog and photograph all of the churches in this district. And the district is made up of 12 villages, and just the district alone, or the township of Aegir, has 17 churches and 3 monasteries, 1 cave chapel with 12th century paintings. And the book itself deals with 12 selective churches, the township of Aegir.
And many of these churches were allowed to fall in disrepair?
Well, most of them, they range between the 15th and 19th century. So one of the problem is the timing. They have aged. The other is that they have not been given any maintenance, any proper attention. Indeed, 2 of the churches, registered, photographed, and catalogued, have been demolished by natural causes.
Let's take a look at some of your work through slides. These are your photographs.
Yes. Well, the first one is the sign we made when we started the project, indicating that this project was under the auspices of Ball State University. And the slide you're seeing now presents the monastery of Saint Panteleimon, which I helped restore.
Is that your first restoration project?
That was my first restoration project.
That's the one you found as a student?
Yes, and there is the first stage of the monastery as it was found in 1965, and then the second slide shows Ball State University students in the summer of 1969 working in the conservation.
How many students would work on your project?
I had, in 69 I had 4, in 70 I had 3, and this is one of the frescoes showing God the Father in one of the vaults of the monastery.
It looks very early. What period?
That is 1620. And architectural drawings were made of each one of the monuments. And this is floor plans and cross-sections. Other monuments are not as eminent, like this one. This church looks like a church. And when I saw the priest going in, I thought it might be a church, and indeed it was a church. And although the exterior looks very unimpressive, as you enter these undistinguished churches, they're richly decorated with most impressive wall paintings, as you will see.
Have you had any problems entering the churches?
No. Once we were granted permit from the Greek Ministry of Culture and Sciences, the Office of Antiquities and Reconstruction, and we also worked in cooperation with the curator of monuments of the region.
Now, these are very lovely frescoes, and if not cared for, would have completely deteriorated.
The deterioration happens all the time, war as well as pollution. Fortunately, in the provinces of Greece, the problem of pollution is rather limited. And you have architectural drawings of the church you just seen. Another very remote church.
Yet there are beautiful frescoes within the...
But the architectural drawings, they're richly illustrated inside. Then you have various architectural drawings. The screen in one of the churches, richly carved wood and decorated with impressive icons or religious images.
And the exterior of this church looks like what?
It looks like a square building.
Yeah, well, for example,
this one looks more, we thought it was a chicken coop, but actually this is a small chapel. And as you go inside, as you will see next, it has a beautiful painting.
Oh, why don't they
the
have...
exterior is very misleading.
Why is that?
Because between 1453 and 1821, Greece was under Turkish occupation. And the Turkish masters of the Greeks did not allow them to build churches in the grandeur style of the Byzantine. So they allowed to build humble structures, but they were free to illustrate them richly in the interior.
I see. Now, I understand that through your efforts, you co-authored this book.
Anyone dealing with ancient monuments must work with the curator of monuments of the area. So the co-author is the legal approval with the Greek authorities. His name has to appear in any publication.
But the work, in essence, is yours.
The work, a major extent, is mine.
And the book is being considered for a major recognition.
In April of 1985, when it was published, the publisher submitted to the Academy of Athens, that prestigious and ancient organization of Greece, for consideration for a prize. The appropriate committee of the Academy then sent the book out to various scholars asking for the review and critique. Once the critiques arrived, then the committee, based upon the reviews and critiques, made a very strong recommendation to recommending the book for a prize for its scholarship and its major contribution to preservation of the Greek heritage. Actually, today, the entire membership of the Academy of Athens is to vote on the recommendations of the committee. They tell me that usually 99% the membership approves the committee's recommendation. If that happens, such an honor will be not only an honor to me individually, but it is also an honor and recognition to the work of the Friends of Greek Studies, the various families in Muncie, Indiana, that made this work possible, because without their financial and moral support, my work in Greece would have been impossible. So the whole work actually should be dedicated to the Friends of Greek Studies.
Good. And we certainly say you're most deserving of that honor. Thank you, Dr. John Koumoulides.
Thank you very much
for sharing your research in Greece with us. Dr. Tetsumaro Hayashi, professor of English at Ball State University and director of the John Steinbeck Research Institute, is our guest today. We're going to talk about his preparation for a paper that will be delivered in North Carolina on John Steinbeck and the Old Testament. Is that a little incongruous, Dr. Hayashi, John Steinbeck and the Old Testament?
Well, I don't think so. Steinbeck employed a number of sources, Shakespeare, Bible, among other British, European sources, but Old Testament happened to be one of his obsessively interested sources, and that is a fascinating subject to explore, and this is one of the subjects I have been studying. And
what have you found out in relation to your research?
well, I think one of the major themes was good versus evil, and his obsessive interest in Genesis, for instance, and the Cain and Abel motif. And in fact, he employed a number of Cain and Abel related names and themes and motifs in, for instance, in East of Eden, of Mice and Men, and To a God Unknown, and you can go on and on. You find a number of references, echoes, and influences from the Old Testament, as well as the New Testament.
Did he exercise editorial license in using the Old Testament in his work?
Yes, he actually employs some archetypal patterns from the Old Testament, and love and rejection of love, and the impact of that on human behavior. You know, to understand why certain individuals behave the way they do, and Steinbeck employed Shakespearean motifs and biblical motifs to enrich the context. And the Old Testament has been one of the major sources he employed in his fiction.
In recent years, I think it's been more popular to examine the man as well as his works. What made him function? What kind of an individual was he? And in some cases, I think it detracts from his work sometimes when they find flaws in the man himself.
Yes, that's essentially true. He was advisor to 4 Democratic presidents, for instance, and actively involved in Vietnam War as a civilian advisor to Lyndon B. Johnson. And he was extremely active in politics as a speechwriter for Adlai Stevenson first, and later as Lyndon B. Johnson's speechwriter.
Was this the capacity in which he was an advisor to the president?
Yeah, in one of the capacities. Another capacity, which is rather shocking sometimes, is that he was advising some of the top brasses at Pentagon, for instance, what kind of bombs to be used in order to force them, the enemies, to come to a conference table, for instance. And you'll be amazed at the kind of intimate relationships he had with the White House, Pentagon people, and the Defense Department and so forth.
Would you classify him as a hawk or a dove or in between?
Yes, in the 60s he became one of the devout hawks and defenders of American policy in Vietnam. As a result, he was denounced by former friends and foes throughout the world almost.
Had he become involved in politics prior to this?
Oh yes, indeed. He was always interested in politics, more or less as a patriot. During the World War II, he volunteered to serve as a war correspondent. During the Vietnam War, he also volunteered to go to Vietnam to see what is happening in his own eyes, to report back to the States.
How do you account for this continued and increasing interest in Steinbeck and his work?
It's always puzzles me. His reputation is rising all over the world, in USA, Japan, India, and there will be another 3rd International Congress to be held in Seoul, Korea in a few years. We had a Congress, 2nd one in the USA, about a year ago, and the first one was held in Japan, for instance.
New material keep coming to light concerning Steinbeck? And
yes, definitely true. Lots of declassified letters, messages, and cables.
You say declassified.
Yes.
Did he put some restrictions on the release of material?
Well, actually, some of the advices he gave to Pentagon people, White House people, about the war, how to end the war honorably, but by specific means. And therefore, some messages are top secret. Therefore, some of them have to be declassified. And finally, many of them are being declassified and being donated to various research libraries, such as Lyndon B. Johnson Library at the University of Texas at Austin.
Anything surprising that would change your views of Steinbeck?
No, I am getting to know him much more dimensionally, of course. I had no idea how actively and intimately he was advising president during Vietnam War, for instance. What kind of bomb to be used to force the enemy to come to the conference table so that U.S. troops can withdraw honorably. And some of the messages are very delicate and sensitive. And I think the major concern was to end the war honorably and withdraw our troops without being embarrassed about it.
During this period of intense political activism, was Steinbeck writing to any degree?
He was writing kind of informal report from Vietnam and Saigon, Laos, and so forth, writing a kind of diary called Letters Alicia, he entitled it, and publishing that as a series of informal essays, or almost like a diary, in the Newsday, Long Island newspaper.
So he continued right up until he died?
Yes, shortly before he died.
Thank you, Dr. Hayashi. Our guest has been Dr. Tetsumaro Hayashi, professor of English at Ball State University and director of the John Steinbeck Research Institute. Our next guest will talk about women's health issues. Toxic shock syndrome was recently back in the news after many of us thought it had been taken care of with research and publicity. To talk with us about some interesting new research in this area and other medical problems facing today's woman is Dr. Denise Amschler, Ball State Physiology and Health Science professor. That was a very unfortunate incident, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It brought to mind the immediacy, again, for women to be more aware of toxic shock and how to prevent it. It trickled off for a while in the news, and we sort of got complacent about it, but it is still with us.
And then, of course, we're talking about the young Ball State student who died.
Yes, that is right. We lost one, and everyone was very saddened by it.
How can women protect themselves, prevent this?
Well, I think knowledge about the nature of the syndrome would be helpful, as well as a knowledge of what risk factors to look for and just some common sense behaviors regarding their use of certain items, particularly tampons, as well as even contraceptive sponges.
But we're talking, in essence, about a bacteria.
Yes, we are. Most people are familiar with the Staphylococcus bacteria. This is a particular strain of it called the Staphylococcus aureus. And it is a common bacteria. It is found often on the skin and in the nose and the throat and in women's vaginas. So it is not something that is highly unusual. The big question is, how does its growth get promoted? The toxin is what is so lethal when it's in sufficient amounts, and what promotes the growth of that toxin and what allows it to get into the bloodstream and wreak such devastating effects on the body. And there are a lot of different theories about that. The first one had to do with the Rely tampon that was on the market in the late 70s. Of course, Rely was immediately withdrawn when the problem started occurring, but we've had about 2,500 cases of toxic shock between 1979 and 1984, with several hundred deaths. So we know that other tampons are involved, particularly we think the ones that are more absorbent. We've looked at a lot of different theories about it. One feeling is that extra absorbency blocks airflow and blocks normal flow of, say, menstrual fluid. It provides a good growth medium for bacteria that might already be present. There is another feeling that certain materials that are used in the manufacturing of tampons, particularly those that are made with synthetic substances. Not too long ago, the substance polyacrylate was withdrawn from some tampons. There was a certain manufacturer actually that pulled these off the shelf and redid them with a different fiber because it was felt that the synthetic materials perhaps were a greater irritant to tissues and perhaps opened them up to lower resistance and allowed the Staph aureus to get into the system. Same thing has been said about applicators, plastic applicators being more abrasive to tissues than cardboard ones.
How about calcium? Let's move to another topic, which is very much in the news and of great concern to women, and we hear about increasing calcium intake.
Oh yes, definitely. It's something that's gotten a lot of publicity lately, something I'm very personally concerned about with my students, because we know now that between the years of 15 and 35, we are putting on our massive bone density, our peak bone density. And so if you're in that age group, you still have an excellent opportunity to make your bones as hard as possible through calcium intake. And the big concern is that perhaps our recommended daily allowances for women for daily calcium intake have been too low. And previously they were set at 800 milligrams a day. Now we're looking at between maybe 1,000 and 1,200 milligrams a day for premenopausal women, and as much as 1,400 to 1,500 milligrams a day for postmenopausal women. And of course, the best way to do this is to get more dairy products into your diet. They're the ideal source of calcium because they also contain vitamin D, and you have to have vitamin D to metabolize calcium. So they're the ideal primary source. And it's really not that difficult. If you like milk, you have it made, because a glass of milk has about 300 milligrams of calcium. And of course, the bottom line of all this is to try to lower one's risk of osteoporosis. And that is a major concern of women as they age, as they hit menopausal years. Their estrogen levels cut back, which speeds up the demineralization of the bones. And osteoporosis can be very debilitating. It is a silent disease in the early stages. And unfortunately, many women wait until it's too late to try to do something about it, when what they're trying to do at that point will only be of limited value. It will certainly help, but it would not do as much as if they had started earlier in life.
And they should start, tell us once again.
Yes, definitely. Between the ages of 15 and 35, you need calcium to build peak bone mass, and then after that you need calcium all through the rest of your life to repair the bones as they break down. So there's never a time that you don't need calcium.
How about our calcium in capsule form?
Calcium supplements are available, and of course many manufacturers have jumped on the bandwagon as the interest has peaked. And we really don't recommend that as your primary source, because you never know if you're getting enough vitamin D. Some calcium supplements don't provide you with the right kind of calcium. If your doctor recommends a calcium supplement, or you know that there is just no way you're going to get it dietarily, make sure that you choose a form that contains calcium carbonate, because it contains the highest percent of calcium, which is about 40%. And I might also add that one of the cheapest sources of calcium carbonate is in Tums. Consumer Reports did a comparison survey not long ago, and they found that Tums contain a substantial amount of calcium carbonate. But beware of certain supplements, because some calcium supplements contain toxic materials that could actually make you sick, like lead, for example.
Which you'd think would almost be banned.
Well, you would think so, but they are available. Yes, you know, the consumer must beware. But we still feel that the dietary forms are very important. And along with calcium intake, exercise, because exercise will help your body know where to distribute the calcium. And where you put on the most stress on your bones is where you will develop the greatest hardness, which of course you need calcium to do. So exercise all parts of your body, not just some parts of the body. Do it now, do it through the rest of your life, and it will It will not guarantee that you don't have osteoporosis, but it will certainly reduce your risk, which is very worthwhile doing.
You look like a prime example of what a woman should look like in the prime of health. Do you follow your own advice?
Yes, I do, but I'm fortunate in that I grew up drinking milk, and I love milk, and I love all dairy products, and pizza with cheese, and there's a zillion ways to get calcium in the diet. Yes, and I do exercise. I take aerobics classes 3 days a week. And my grandmother has osteoporosis. My mother has not been a milk drinker, and now she's trying to make amends for all of those years. So I look at those two generations, and I hope to do just a little bit more to offset my risk.
Yours is the beginning of a new generation.
Well, let's hope.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Dr. Denise Amschler sharing some of the women's health issues with us on Ball State Today. Thank you.